Howdy folks, Shell Presto DiBaggio here, awesome artist, remarkable writer, and undaunted luminary of my time. Today we have a special little treat. A while back I asked you folks to submit top 5 lists that you would like to see me answer the questions to. Top 5 lists are really popular on the internet, and I thought it would be funny to just do some pretty random ones. This is probably going to turn into a bit of an occasional series, actually, because I think it's a fun and interesting way to, prompt things to talk about. But also, as I've been recording these, I find I have a lot to say, and I think it's interesting to explain my reasonings behind these. So we'll see how many I cram into this video. So just so you folks know, you're going to be seeing me draw Hecate. She is a character that has not yet appeared in any Ascension Epoch books, although her mother has. She's Sophia Tabularis. She's a witch, for one thing, and not the sort of fun anime-ish spell-casting or spell-throwing sort of witch. Her powers tend to be more subtle than that. She can trilocate, which means that she can kind of have 2 astral projections of herself running around at any given time. And, she has weird dreams, does incantations and spells, the one she's most known for being her enchanted bullets. Alright, so let's jump right into this. I'm going to start with my top 5 X-Men characters, because why the heck not? And, I've got number 5 and their runner-up just sitting here, and I'm going to pick one of them at random because I like them both pretty much equally. So let's go with number 5 is Warlock. Warlock is part of the Phalanx. He is an alien. He was in the New Mutants, and he crashed down to Earth. He's interesting in that... how to put it? He's one of those small fish in a big ocean types. He doesn't understand humans very well, and one of the big parts of his being in the New Mutants is his growing friendship with Cypher as he tries to figure humans out. And I have a tendency to like characters like that. Something with characters that have something really bizarre going on or that have to sort of learn to regain their humanity, or in Warlock's case, gain humanity they never had. So watching his character develop in the New Mutants was very interesting for me. And he also talks funny. And as a writer myself, I really like characters with specific verbal tics. I think they're really fun to write. And Warlock was actually one of the characters that I played in Mike's superhero online RPG, Less Than Gods, back in the day, and I just had a blast writing him. Number 4 is another New Mutant, Cannonball. Cannonball's power, I think, is pretty interesting. As a matter of fact, we use something similar to it in our Ascension Epoch books for Meteora. It's so interesting. And his is, he's invulnerable and super strong, but only when he's blasting, like a cannonball. He only has 1 speed, fast. And I thought that was a very interesting limitation. So right off the bat, his powers are interesting. You'll also notice I have a lot of quote-unquote Boy Scout characters on my lists. I just really enjoy quiet, reserved characters that take themselves seriously, that have a strong moral compass. I actually think you'll see someone like that on almost every list, actually. And Cannonball is one of those guys on this list. I also really enjoyed that in the original X-Men books, Cyclops had been there the longest. He was the leader of the team. And you see that in a lot of books. Like, the person with the most experience often becomes the leader or shows a tendency to lead. Like also in the X-Men books, Wolverine tends to know what he's doing. So if the leader, Cyclops, or occasionally Storm, well, occasionally, we'll talk about when I'm reading when I read X-Men comics and who was doing what at the time. But Storm was often not the leader when I was reading X-Men comics, or in the titles I was. But Wolverine can step up and make some decisions, and he's working from experience, so that's good. But the New Mutants was especially interesting, and Cannonball especially interesting, because he was chosen to be leader of the New Mutants, and he didn't have any combat experience. None of them did. They weren't even supposed to be going out into combat. So seeing him become a leader is also a very interesting part of his character that I enjoyed. There's a chance that you didn't know those particular characters, but here's one that you're going to know, and that's Beast. He's my number 3 choice. I mean, well, one, you were going to get a blue furry comic on my X-Men list, and, it came down to either Nightcrawler or Beast, and I think Beast edges out. I really enjoy, especially when Stan Lee writes characters with a huge vocabulary. I think Beast is very interesting because most people know him as blue and furry, and he did that to himself. Most mutants were born a specific way. He was not born blue and furry. He was just born with acrobatics and huge feet and huge hands and super strength and super smarts. And, he's just one of those gentle giant characters. He does have a strong moral compass. One of my favorite lines from him in all of his appearances was during the Phoenix Saga. He says something along the Dark Phoenix Saga, sorry. During the Dark Phoenix Saga, he says at one point about the Shi'ar taking Jean Grey that if Jean were Satan himself, he would still want her defended in the court of law because fair trials are what makes, humanity and fairness possible. And that's a hugely powerful sentiment. So, Beast always has something good to say. He's an important character, and he's a fun character. Despite being so, to be honest, dreadfully serious most of the time, and despite being the guy that you turn to for answers, he's also a wisecracker, and that makes him excessively fun. So, yeah. All right, so we finally have one of the, we'll say, bad boy anti-hero characters on here, and it is not Wolverine or Gambit. My number 2 choice is Chamber. Chamber was part of Generation X. His whole deal was that his powers were essentially that he had high-level energy inside of him, so his name, Chamber, is literally that he's a chamber for this energy. He doesn't need to eat. He doesn't need to drink. I don't even know that he needs to breathe. But the big thing is, when his powers went off, they exploded because he couldn't contain them, and he's missing from his nose down to his sternum. So he's missing a huge portion of his face and chest. And yes, he is an angsty character, but I think they did it well just by giving him such a strange send-off on becoming a mutant. And, it was one of those things where he couldn't live a normal life afterwards, so he goes to the New Mutants, and he, in contrast, a lot of the characters on superhero books want to be superhero books, and he's just kind of hanging out there because he doesn't really know what else to do. And I thought that was particularly interesting. And then, of course, seeing where he goes from there. I actually enjoyed him joining the Weapon X program to see if they had any tech to fix him, and that was an interesting storyline. But one of the big things with Chamber is more than most X-Men characters, they don't seem to know what to do with him. After they fixed his face with the Weapon X program, they had a weird thing where the, tech they put in him, if he ever lost his powers, would just explode, which makes no sense whatsoever. And then he kind of went into character limbo for a while, and I haven't seen anything good with him in it since. And I don't read X-Men comics anymore, despite them being my favorite comic, which actually you can go check out an upcoming Attention Span Labs video if you want to know more about that. And number one, if you know me, you could probably guess. I've already mentioned him once in this video, and that is Cyclops. Cyclops was the original leader of the X-Men. He obviously has the I-beams, which are force I-beams, not heat I-beams, as a lot of people think they are. That means they don't give off heat, they don't burn through things, they are pretty much like a really, really, really strong long-distance punch. He can't control them, so his character has a bit of angst there. Especially in the earlier issues of X-Men, he was always afraid that he was going to hurt people he got close to. So you had the, was it requited, was it unrequited love with Jean Grey going on there, where he didn't want to say anything. But he eventually gets over that, and he's just a guy that gets the job done. And I really like leader characters that have a good plan. And Cyclops always goes in with a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. And really rolls with the punches, and I've just always enjoyed that facet of his personality. And it's funny because there are other series, like we'll say Ninja Turtles, where the leader character, Leonardo, took a long time to grow on me. I don't know that I really appreciated Leonardo as a character until I was like 22 years old, and I started liking Ninja Turtles when I was like 4 or 5. But yeah, I've just always enjoyed Cyclops as a character, and he was the first character like that that I really enjoyed, so that's a bit of a landmark too. And just because you're probably curious as to who the runner-up was that didn't make it onto that top 5 list, tied for number 5 was Strong Guy from X Factor. He's a, large bruiser type character. He's huge. He's probably really fun to draw because he looks really bizarre. He's got very small legs, but a huge torso. And he's bald except for one part of his hair. He originally came in as a bodyguard for Lila Cheney. And then he stuck around on X Factor, and probably the reason that I like him is he's hilarious. What he says is usually unexpected. Peter David writes him really, really well. He was the character that back in the 90s when political correctness was really trying so hard to trip over, it was trying so hard to not offend anyone that it was tripping over itself. He very famously, in the same press conference where he doesn't have, there's a press conference with all the members of X Factor, and they're introducing themselves and they're stating their names, and he didn't pick his code name going into the press conference, so he can't figure out what his name should be, and they ask him what his superhero name is, and he's like, Strong Guy, It's like, well, that's your name now, so good job. And he interrupts the press conference at one point when they're asking the other members of X Factor what it's like to be a mutant, or about mutant rights and support and everything like that. And he interrupts and says that, we don't like to be called mutants. We prefer to be called genetically challenged. And the press runs with that. Genetically challenged becomes a term in all the X books then, and it's really a horrible term for mutants because when you say genetically challenged, it implies that there's some hardship going on there. Very often, physically challenged people, that they've been dealt a card that is a rough card to handle, and things that for you and I are easy to do, like, walking across a room and reaching up and getting something on a top shelf, can be a real struggle for them. And, but genetically challenged implies the same sort of hardship, and a lot of mutants who were, superpowered beyond belief, like, Phoenix is a telekinetic. Almost everything is easier for her. Wolverine has a healing factor. That's not a challenge at all. That's a great, great benefit. And so many mutants that really took pride in what they could do, and, you'd get mutants like Magneto that just see themselves as above humans, really took issue with that. And I thought that was hilarious and really sums up a lot of Strong Guy's character. So, yeah, he's a pretty awesome character, and if there was a sixth slot, he'd be on this list. All right. My videos tend to run long, so let's pop another one on here because we can. So I'm going to do I'm going to do my top 5 public domain characters. And my husband Mike thought that this was a ludicrous category to do because he's like, the public domain is huge. The public domain includes anything written before, is it 1921, 1922? So, yeah, 1924 is the year. So, yeah, anything written before 1924, and a couple of things that, just weren't copyrighted correctly at the time or have fallen out of copyright and the copyright was not renewed. So that's a huge, huge breadth of work. But I think I got my top 5 list down good and set, so we're going to try to go from there. One thing you should know about my list for the public domain, though, is that I intentionally didn't include characters that are or are arguably in the public domain that are owned by other companies and fall into other lists. That made this a little easier and gave me some wiggle room for some characters that may tie those that I would like to put on a list at some point. So, hopping in. Number 5, the Scarecrow from The Wizard of Oz. When I first said the Scarecrow, Mike thought I might have been saying the Scarecrow of Romney Marsh, but I am a huge Wizard of Oz fan, and I guess the thing that always struck me about the Scarecrow, I like the movies too, and I always think he looks visually interesting in the movies, and I often enjoy the way he moves. Because, actors tend to try to play him as, not having solid bones, which I think is interesting. It's Ray Bolger. Ray Bolger did a fantastic job of that. But I'm not specifically talking about the movie versions either. I'm also talking about the original book version. And one, I really like his redesign. Denslow is a fine artist, and some of his stuff looks really beautiful, but the main characters in Oz in the first Oz book looked pretty cartoony, but when Neil came in, I really liked the way he drew Scarecrow. So visually, I think Scarecrow is interesting too. But the big thing is, I really enjoyed in the first book the subtlety of you have all these characters with insecurities, and you know, despite the insecurities, despite needing a brain or heart or courage, all the characters in that book display the things that they think they're lacking. And I think that's a really important lesson for kids to learn, and it really struck me when I was a kid. So, you'll see, I do like leader characters, and I thought Scarecrow as a leader and coming up with plans was really interesting and flew in the face of his saying he needed a brain. So I really enjoyed that public domain character from The Wizard of Oz. All right, now we're getting into the characters that I probably like equally for different reasons. But it's a top 5 list, so I have to arbitrarily put them in some kind of order. But from here on out, really and truly, every character could be number 1 on this list for some reason or another, depending on how I change my criteria or how I'm feeling that day. So, number 4 is Hydro-Man. Hydro-Man was created by Bill Everett, who also created Namor from Marvel Comics fame. But he was in a comic company that was not Marvel or DC, so he can make it on this list. You won't see him in my public domain redesign series because there's nothing to redesign about him. His costume screams 1940s. It's simple. He has aviator goggles. I have no idea why. But yeah, the tweaks to his costume are very, very small when he enters the Ascension Epoch. And there are characters that I really enjoy in the Ascension Epoch that are public domain characters, but I don't think what they originally appeared in are that fantastic. But Hydro-Man is not one of those cases. I enjoy all the Hydro-Man comics. I wish that there were more of them. He's an awesome character. He's a gets down, gets the job done. He's a rare character where you feel, back in the day, a lot of female characters could feel flat and boring and just kind of tacked onto the story. Joyce, his girlfriend, is not one of those. She's usually knee-deep in his capers. And he's also not one of those I'm going to solve everything myself problems. He also he got his powers from a scientist friend making this formula, but he's brave and he steps up and he lets him test it on him, and he gets the fantastic powers to not only control water but also turn into water. That's actually a little too powerful, and we tweak that when we bring him into the Ascension Epoch. He's a member of the Challenger Foundation. I do that one moment where I plug my books and say, if you want to be ready for future appearances of Hydro-Man in the Ascension Epoch, you should check out Copper Knights and Granite Men, the first book in the Challenger Confidential series. And but Hydro-Man also has not only a strict sense of right and wrong, and as a matter of fact, in the original comics, he probably goes too far. Because I think it's the very first issue where he just sinks an entire boat full of communists and watches it go down proudly. And that was a theme in 1940s comic books. But yeah, I don't even want to say he's brutal in a comical way, because he still has a code of honor and everything like that. But there's just something about the comics. I often like things that feel a little, I don't know, maybe a little too much or a little hyperbolic. So we tone Hydro Man down when we bring him into the Ascension Epoch. But yeah, he's just a very straightforward, grim, get it done character. I'm not even sure how to describe the appeal of Hydro Man and how sort of crazy gonzo the book is while not losing its sense of reality and verisimilitude, as it were. My favorite Hydro Man comic is when a bunch of crooks who undoubtedly deserve the punishment they get find out that Hydro Man is Bob Blake. They break into his apartment, they try to kill him, and Hydro Man kills them in self-defense. But then the police show up, and Bob Blake doesn't know how to explain all of this to him and present it in a way that shows that he did it in self-defense, and there's the secret identity to worry about and everything. So he and his, quite frankly, badass girlfriend decide to prop up all the criminals at his table and put cards in their hands so that at a cursory glance from the other room, the officers just think the whole ruckus was a rowdy card game. And that's the sort of bizarre but interesting stories you get in Hydro Man. So yeah, he's undoubtedly one of my favorite characters, period, and we definitely bring him into the Ascension Epoch. I have quite a few lists prepped, and this is actually the only girl that appears on any of them unless it's strictly talking about female characters. So yeah, that makes this a bit of a standout. And it's Penelope from the Odyssey. And I'm going to talk about my number 2 character as well, because I might as well, and that's Odysseus. When you're talking the entirety of the public domain, you can feel an overwhelming sense of who to choose. And yeah, the Odyssey was one of the original adventure stories, and when you go back as far as ancient Greece, you often don't get a sense of character, or you get a sort of a one-dimensional sort of character, like we'll say Achilles and Hector both tend to be one-note characters. Agamemnon, I think, is a one-note character. But Odysseus carries his whole book back then, and it's an interesting book, and you get this character who goes through these horrible trials and is trying to get home. You feel, as you're on this adventure with him, a deep sense of yearning to get home, and you also see his temptations, when he wants to stay. I believe he wanted to stay with Circe, and there was the island of the Lotus Eaters, where he often gets into situations too where the opposite of feeling helpless and hopeless and wanting to go home somewhere comfortable, he also goes places that are incredibly comfortable and incredibly tempting to stay. And among other things, it's his love for his wife Penelope that drives him to go home. And obviously he has fantastic things happen to him. He has the battle with Cyclops, he has facing Scylla and Charybdis and the Sirens and everything. I mean, the Odyssey is a fantastic, fantastic adventure story. And, one of the first and definitely one of the best. But as important as Odysseus is, Penelope, I think, is one of the craftiest, smartest, strongest characters in fiction, female or not. The fact that she goes for, what is it? I don't remember off the top of my head. Is it 10 or 20 years without her husband? She's raising... At that point, for all she knows, she's a single mom. Her husband could be dead. She's raising her son alone. I mean, they're servants and all that, but still, the job of a parent is a huge job. Um, and a woman raising a strong son is, incredibly trying. So she goes through that alone. Her husband amassed wealth. People want her to remarry, and her point in the Odyssey is that when we see at the end of the book there's so much social pressure on her that people are like, you have to take a husband, and she finally has to cave to it. And so her thing is she very craftily sets a bunch of tests that essentially only her husband could possibly overcome. And, one of the suitors in one of the great switcheroos in literature is Odysseus. And when Odysseus solves the problems and meet the challenges, she doesn't just say, "Great, I want to get married." She says, No, I wanted to stay true to my husband. And, obviously he takes the costume off and says, "I am your husband," and it's a happy ending. But her persistence, her constancy, her loyalty, and her craftiness all make her a fantastic standout character. So those are my 3 and my 2 picks. And the final favorite public domain character, the one that takes all the cake, is Lieutenant Gulliver Jones from the book Lieutenant Gulliver Jones, His Vacation, by Edwin Arnold. You will also sometimes hear the book called Gulliver of Mars, similar to Edgar Rice Burroughs' Princess of Mars and John Carter of Mars. However, Gulliver came first, and that's not actually the reason I like him. But when you get into the great, spacefaring or dimension hopping characters of the early 1900s, and all the great action-adventure sci-fi novels, Edgar Rice Burroughs' characters tend to get the most attention. They're the more popular ones. Edgar Rice Burroughs did Tarzan, too, and how to put it? One, Gulliver is far more eccentric. I think, Lieutenant Gulliver Jones, his vacation, is, it takes the action seriously, but it's also funny and sort of off the wall, the way he makes his decisions and what he does. And in comparison to Edgar Rice Burroughs, Burroughs' characters tend to be more serious. The situations, while equally dire, the characters take them in stride. Mike asked me who my favorite Edgar Rice Burroughs characters are, and I'm sitting there debating Tarzan, who's a serious character, and Abner Perry, who is not a serious character at all, from the Pellucidar series. But with Gulliver, it's very easy, in fact. When he first gets to Mars, he doesn't have any particular sense. Well, first off, he's feeling listless at the start of the book, and he's essentially trying to escape some of his responsibilities when he gets transported to Mars. And when he gets there, he doesn't have a particular sense of wanting to go home. He's kind of just going with the flow, and he's a little hapless, and he's trying to figure things out. But as he ends up, he just makes horrible decisions. He ends up falling in love, and the sort of, "I've been in love with you for all of 5 minutes, so I want you in on this." He ends up getting in on a Martian marriage ceremony on a fluke, and interrupting plans for a royal wedding. And his adventures just go sort of crazy from there. You know, he finds out at one point that he goes to this forbidden land, and because he's been to this forbidden land and he looks a little different than other people, like people think he's a ghost. So he uses this to his advantage. You know, he just randomly steals someone's food at some point, you know, without asking. Like he's a very questionable character at some points, but he trudges on, and the book is just kind of hilarious. So of course we're going to use a character like that for the Ascension Epoch. But there are a lot of Ascension Epoch characters where I said in the Hydra Man thing, I'm not fully in love with their source material. You know, we bring in characters like Maureen Marine, and you know, her books tend to be silly or flat. So that there's a lot of things like that where I often, to be quite honest, like the characters in Mike's hands better than I like them in the original creators. But Gulliver Jones is not one of those characters. We are going to have something coming out with him soon, in the coming months on heroicadventurefiction.com, so you should stay tuned to that, and you could weigh in on if you think Gulliver Jones is handled well in Mike DiBaggio's capable hands. But I think they are, obviously. And more importantly, I absolutely love the original book that he was in. It starts off very slow. You might have trouble getting through the first, say, 25 or 30% of the book, but once Gulliver starts moving and traveling and going to the different areas of Mars, it's a wonderfully fantastic adventure. All right, folks. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did and you want to see more of these sort of random top 5 videos from me, please leave a comment below to let me know. I certainly had fun doing this one. Obviously, I'm an artist. I'm also a writer. My husband's a writer. We have books. If you would like to check out our fiction, you can go to heroicadventurefiction.com, all one word, no spaces. If you would like to purchase our books, which are available on Amazon and other online booksellers, you can go to ascensionepoch.com, and we have the links to get the books there, and you can also learn more about the books. I also have links down below if you want to support us financially in other ways. My Subscribestar account, you can leave a one-time tip on PayPal, or you could just, you know, also check out my social media and share this video and the links to my videos with people. That is a huge, huge help. Marketing is harder than you think it would be, folks. Okay, so actually, Happy New Year. I'm going to be posting this later tonight, so it'll probably be 2020 when you guys see this. So, happy 2020. Yes, there will be a New Year's resolution video coming up. So, you know, please like, please subscribe, leave a comment if you want to chime in on this. I would totally want to know what your favorite X-Men characters and public domain characters are, so let's start a discussion down there. And most importantly of all, folks, thanks for joining me, and have an awesome day. Presto, over and out. I live in the middle of nowhere, so it's especially impressive when something out of the ordinary crops up. This is a house in a town around here called Brockton. There's not even a convenience store in Brockton as far as I know, but this guy has a huge, huge, huge display. Visiting it every year is one of the treats of Christmas, as it were. And it's obviously store-bought lights, but there are also parts that he made, like teddy bear carousels and Ferris wheels and seesaws and everything crazy like that. It's just a beautiful display. You can see this house very, very clearly from the highway where it's by. So they do attract quite a few visitors. And there is a donation bucket for Make-A-Wish, I believe it is, outside the display. So the proceeds do go to a good cause. And I just thought it was really impressive, so I wanted to share it with you. I hope you enjoy looking at this video. Thank you to the family that does this. I know it takes them 3 months to put up this display every year, and it does change every year. If you are ever near Brockton, PA during the holidays, they do it all December, and it stays on till 9 o'clock so that they don't disturb their neighbors. Yeah, you should check it out. So Happy New Year's, folks, and have an awesome day.
Farewell and adieu to you, fair Spanish ladies.
Farewell and adieu to you, ladies of Spain.